welcome back to another episode of the Lonely Liberal Podcast. How's it going? How are you doing? I'm Nick Zank, and I'm your host. Man, we got a good show for you today. And I know I say that every show, but first of all, they are good shows. We have a really great track record. But no, this one, I'm feeling even better about this one than I normally do, because this is something I've been wanting to talk about on this show, or frankly to anyone who will listen, for a very, very long time. And that is that the United States of America, the good old US of A, is not a free market. It's just not. And I know, oh God, insert gasp sounds. It isn't. It just isn't. And not only is it not a free market, I think, and what I'm going to argue in this show, the term free market has been used as a political weapon, specifically to selectively cut social spending for ordinary people while protecting the hundreds of billions of dollars in corporate welfare. Okay? All the richest people in the world, but especially in the United States, the Zuckerbergs, the Bezos, the Elon Musks, who, by the way, will be the star of today's show in a lot of ways, made billions of dollars through government spending. Their whole empires were built on government subsidies. So if that's not socialism, I don't know what is. So today we're going to be talking about basically what these terms mean: capitalism, socialism, communism. How much the United States actually subsidizes selective industries when compared to the EU, socialist paradise, the European Union. And then effectively why this narrative around these words are so weaponized. Okay? So again, this is something I'm going to tell you a little story in a second about why this is so personal to me, because I'm petty. But I'm really happy to have you. And don't forget to like and subscribe and all that stuff if you like the show. I'm really, again, all very appreciated. But let's get to it. We got a lot to talk about. So without further ado, let's get to it. All right, before we get into the main show, I wanted to start with a little bit of a story, a little bit of an anecdote, as you will. And it's about this. So around 10 years ago, because my God, I'm getting old, I was in grad school and I was in some economics class or whatnot. And of course, I went to BU, Boston University. And as you can imagine, a very progressive cohort of classmates, very liberal minded. And they were, singing the praises of communism and socialism and all that stuff. Again, stuff, frankly, I didn't disagree with largely, but they were going on and on and on, and, I can't help myself. I have to just argue for the sake of arguing. I'm annoying. As you can see, I've made a whole podcast being basically a glorified I told you so. And so I said to them something that I'm sure, anyone who's had this conversation with people, either in their poli-sci classes, economics classes, or just with friends, are you sure communism and socialism are such good ideas? What about the Soviet Union? What about Maoist China, right? Those didn't work out well. What happened? And of course, you get, absolutely swarmed with, those aren't really good examples. Those weren't true socialist societies. Those weren't true communist societies. It's not fair to attack socialism and communism with those examples because those aren't true examples of those economic systems. And I said, fair enough, because it's true. It is fair. They aren't. And that is a very good rebuttal, one that you will have heard, and it is correct. But then I said something like this. I said, well, then if we can't use those examples to criticize socialism or communism, then we can't use the U.S. to criticize capitalism, because the U.S. isn't a pure capitalist society. So, maybe back off. Maybe capitalism's not so bad. And when I said this in my class, my God, did I get an outroar. They rioted. I heard groans and moans. Someone called me a Trump supporter because this is early Trump days. Oh, I didn't know you were Republican, blah, blah, blah. You love capitalism. I'm not joking. I really got scolded. And again, I literally have a liberal podcast. I am a pretty serious socialist in a lot of ways. But it's exactly what happened, right? Capitalism has such a kind of nasty connotation because of basically what the U.S. has done with its economy. And, very faringly attacked a lot of our wealth disparity. I mean, it's awful. There's so many things you can criticize about the U.S. economic system. But my point, And something that I've been pettily maybe thinking about for the last 10 years is that the U.S. isn't a capitalist system in itself, like totally so, or free market. And no one really shows this better than Mr. Elon Musk, like I said earlier. The world's richest man, net worth of over $800 billion, MAGA icon, the head of the DOGE before that got canned. His whole mission was cutting wasteful government spending, right? He's spent his whole last couple of years saying government subsidies disrupt the free market, electric vehicle tax credits should be eliminated. Basically, he's this embodiment of the free market, right? I want to just let people know that this dude's empire was built on $38 billion of taxpayer money. That's government contracts, that's loans, that's subsidies, that's tax credits. That's what the Washington Post says. That's not me. That's almost certainly an undercount because defense contracts are classified, right? So we're going to come back to Elon more, but I just wanted you to know that the hypocrisy is real and keep that framing in mind as we go forward. But before we go forward, I want to define these words because these things get thrown around like nobody's business and from both the left and the right, but often it's the right criticizing socialism and communism and praising capitalism, the free market and stuff like that. And obviously on the left, it's criticizing capitalism, free market, being pro-socialism, communism. So what's capitalism? Capitalism, by like literal definition of the word, means that private individuals own the means of production. So businesses, factories, land, and they compete for profit. Prices are set by supply and demand, and the U.S. is the good example of capitalism because a lot of ways it is, but again, it's more of a partly than a full. Socialism is almost a harder concept to define because it's a spectrum. At its mildest, it's a mixed economy where the government provides key services, healthcare, education, housing, alongside private markets. It's like a half and half. At the most strong end or the stronger end of the spectrum, it's the government owning basically all the major industries. So if you're trying to keep it on like a spectrum, Scandinavia is actually more on the mild side. And the U.S., I would say, has significant socialist elements, Medicare, Social Security, public schools, stuff like that. Communism is the most extreme version of socialism. It's the government owns literally basically everything. No private property, no market. And again, while not a perfect example, the Soviet Union, Maoist China, Cuba, that's basically the example. But it is important to note that no major economy currently in the world operates like this. This isn't a thing. China, all these countries, they're all some mixed socialist bag because, including the U.S., because of course. And so, again, just to free market, it's very similar to capitalism. It's just basically saying that prices and production are completely determined by supply and demand. No government intervention. So that means no subsidies, no tariffs, cough, cough, no regulations, no bailouts. This is just go, right? And I'm hoping as you hear me define these words, you're like, oh yeah, well, literally Trump puts tariffs on every other day. Clearly, we're not a free market. Keep that in mind, okay? Because this matters. And why it matters is because when someone like Bernie Sanders or AOC or Zoran says, hey, we should have free buses or universal health care, they go, you're a socialist, you're a communist, Cadre Harris, my God. It's a scare tactic, right? But that's not the definition of the word. Medicare is a public insurance program inside a capitalist economy. That's not socialism, that's a mixed economy, right? That's what they do. They mix it up. And so when they say free market, they're not being honest. They're asking you to ignore the trillions of dollars that is flowing through the government to corporations every single year. And that brings us back to Mr. Musk, Elon himself. So, like I said earlier, Elon is basically born from the ashes of government funds. There's no other way to put it. $38 billion. And again, I want to emphasize how conservative that is because, again, defense contracts are not public, right? 2/3 of that $38 billion came just in the last 5 years. In 2024 alone, it was $6 billion, the largest total ever for a specific individual. That's crazy. So let's break it down. One of the bigger ones, and I don't think it's so shocking, is SpaceX, right? It's the whole company of SpaceX was effectively built by NASA and the Pentagon, okay? Before SpaceX had a single successful launch, right? So early days, NASA gave it a $278 million contract in 2006. That wasn't some sort of reward or prize. That's called seed money, folks, okay? That's the government betting on a startup. Nothing wrong with that. But weird from Elon, right? Since then, since that original investment, NASA has invested $15 billion in SpaceX. The Department of Defense has done multiple billions as well. So on top of that, I'm just like reading this because it's so crazy. I'm looking at the year-by-year totals. SpaceX has basically gotten at least $2 to $4 billion every year from federal contracts, okay? And the thing about government contracts is that they're not charity, right? So SpaceX does stuff for them. It's not like it's just like we're writing you checks. They launch satellites. They grab astronauts, remember, from the International Space System. But that money is taxpayer money, right? That's them picking a winner. That's them putting the thumb on a scale, right? And that's exactly what a subsidy does. Just because you call it a government contract doesn't change the actual function of that money. The government chose SpaceX. The government pays SpaceX. SpaceX grew because of the money that the government gave them. That's just the truth, okay? Tesla is the other one. And this one should even be less surprising. But I guess, it's a little older, so maybe not as top of mind, right? In 2010, Tesla was weeks from bankruptcy. People don't talk about that. And Musk had to actually go to the energy department and ask for money. And he got it. He got a $465 million low-interest loan. A former Tesla employee said, Tesla would have not survived without the loan. It was a critical loan at a critical time. The loan saved the company. Again, nothing wrong with this. Just keep that in mind. Since that loan, Tesla has collected $11.4 billion in regulatory credits. What is that? It's zero-emission vehicle credits that other automakers have to buy from Tesla because they don't meet emission standards. That's a government-created revenue stream. I'll explain it. So there's these emission credits and standards that happen, which is they say, okay, you can't emit this much. Well, because Tesla doesn't emit anything with its cars, they're EVs, Ford, GM, all them will buy credits, emission credits, to then not overcharge their targets. So Tesla can make money just by selling these credits. And not only did they sell these credits, they sold them to the tune of $11 billion. Okay? Here's another example. In 2020, right, if you just went off pure profits from sales of cars, Tesla would have lost $700 million. Instead, they reported an $862 million profit, which was all due to this subsidy program, okay? The tax credit program. That's not even including the consumer EV tax credit, which is like $7,000 off a Tesla car, which is, again, helped fuel Tesla demand. Again, things I like. I'm just saying these are government fundings. And that we could go to state and local. That's another $3-4 billion. And it's just so interesting because not only does this narrative get buried because it's convenient for Musk to bury it right now, he's actively pulling the ladder. Musk now publicly supports eliminating the EV tax credit, the very policy that I just explained to you that made Tesla viable. Why? Because Tesla doesn't need it anymore, but literally every other EV manufacturer does. Killing the credit won't hurt him, but it devastates the competition. And again, putting the thumb on the scale, picking winners, picking losers, giving some companies a ton of money, giving other companies none, that's not a free market. That's not capitalism, okay? So keep that in mind. He's just a perfect example. But I want to compare this bigger picture because Musk is a good one to pick on for a lot of reasons. But maybe you're thinking to yourself, Nick just has some sort of liberal vendetta against Elon Musk, which is ironic because, like I said, when Tesla was cruising originally before he went full MAGA, I liked it. I mean, I'm pro EVs, obviously. So it's interesting. But he's not an anomaly. He's just a symptom of a U.S. economy that runs very, very much on government support. So I wanted to go through some major industries and wanted to compare them to the EU. And this comparison is a little tricky because the EU legally requires all state aid to be disclosed and approved. So if the EU gives $1 billion to healthcare, that has to all be allocated, approved, and documented very clearly because it's such a big part of their economic model. The US, on the other hand, has nothing like that. So part of the original look, when you just look at it at a first glance, it looks like the European subsidies are much bigger because they're very traceable. But actually, that's not true when you actually calculate real savings. So I wanted to show this stuff. So I want to start with fossil fuels, something that I rant about because I work in the energy industry. But people don't know this. The annual subsidies for the fossil fuel industry is $34.8 billion. That's just explicitly. That's not even including implicit subsidies, so things that just make them more competitive on a softer side, which would be another $62 billion. Compare that to the EU's annual aid, remember the whole European Union, of $8 billion. So a big, big difference there, at least 4 times more, probably more like 5-6 times more. Let's go to agriculture, so farming, right? Last year, we gave $24 billion of agricultural subsidies. And the OB3, the One Big Beautiful Bill, they want to call it now the Working Families Act, that gave another $7 billion a year of subsidies to farmers. Compare that to EU of 10 to 12, depending on the year. So no one is subsidizing more in terms of per capita of our farms. It's crazy. It's I'm not even, again, I just almost said it's crazy. It's not it's necessarily crazy. It's crazy that people don't view it like this. They don't, when they think of socialism, they think of, Sweden. They don't think of freaking Iowa or whatever. Let's go to the pharma biomedical industry. Last year, $47 billion. If we compare to EU, $16 billion. Defense, not even close, 866 total defense spending. If you break it down to be a little bit more precise, it's around $400 billion of what I would call subsidies. Compare it to the EU defense budget, the total defense budget of $300 billion. Let's go to semiconductors, all right, things inside your tech. The chips, $52 billion in the CHIPS Act and $43 billion in the European CHIPS Act. And then renewables, clean energy. Well, the One Big Beautiful Bill, OB3, ended a lot of these credits. It ended the EV credit. It ended the solar credits. And in fact, many of you don't know this, the Trump administration has proposed to pay $1.9 billion to kill offshore wind projects. They spent almost $1 billion, $930 million to Total Energies, a French oil and gas company, to have them not build an offshore wind farm. Then 2 other projects got another almost $1 billion. So we spent $2 billion to not build wind, whereas the EU spent $55 billion to build clean energy in general. Okay? Keep in mind, that's almost as much as the fossil fuel industry gets subsidized in the United States. Okay? That's $34 billion to an industry that is literally destroying the planet. That's so much money to pharma, big pharma, which, by the way, we have the highest cost of treatment in the world, even though we're subsidizing them the most. And their biggest one, the environmental one, we are the lowest in. It's crazy. And so if we go back to my argument in my graduate classroom, right? My professor looking at me with shame when she said, the USSR isn't a fair representation of socialism. She's right. It isn't. And the U.S. is also not a fair representation of capitalism. But truthfully, and a little bit kind of undercutting the whole point of the show, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that any major economy in this timeline of life, right, is going to be some variation of a mixed economy. Some things are going to be run by the government. Some things are going to be run by the private sector. Now, I would think, maybe more than a lot of you, the government should be way more in charge of running healthcare. I actually think airlines should be owned by the government. I think Wi-Fi, I think you could even argue AI over the time, but definitely trains, definitely all these kind of common goods, I would all think should be run by the government. I am without a doubt a democratic socialist for sure. But maybe so are you. You know what I mean? Do you really think that this is working? Is private health insurance really working? Companies really regulate themselves? Do you really want Elon Musk? Because he's getting a lot of government money. I'm wondering why you don't want that money. Why are you okay with the richest people getting billions of dollars of subsidies, where when we ask for them, just normal Joes, well, you're commie. And that's our show, folks. Thank you so much for listening today. If you like the show, let me know. I would like to, you could either write to media@thelonelyliberal.com, comment on YouTube. I'm curious because, yeah, it's interesting. Like, I feel very strongly that it should be a mixed economy, some good parts of capitalism, some good parts of socialism. And also, a lot of this conversation, determines based on who's in charge, what government. Sometimes different governments work for different people given the context. So things are very complicated. I'm just mad that when people often use these things as outs, they oversimplify things to then kind of be lazy in a way and just make people feel confused. So that's why I did this show. But anyway, let me know what you think. I'll be back on Sunday, and until then, take it easy, man. Bye.